Hello. Today, I want to take a moment to talk about something that is a source of confusion in terms of our desires, whether they're material desires or physical desires or financial desires or relationship desires. And the point that's confusing for a lot of people, especially those who are on a spiritual path, is whether desire is at the root of all suffering. Because the interpretation of some of the spiritual teachings is that desire is actually at the root of suffering. So I want to bring some clarity to that topic today. In the sacred scriptures of India's wealth of knowledge, there is a sacred scripture called the Upanishads. And in the Upanishads, it is stated that you are what your deepest driving desires. As your desire is, so is your intention. As your intention is, so is your will. As your will is, so is your deed. And as your deed is, so is your destiny. So if we just take a moment to absorb the wholeness of what this is saying, it's really telling us that the attainment of desire is literally within our reach. There's no distance between our desire and our destiny. And all we do is we come into alignment with our intention and our will and our action in order to achieve our desire. Now, in the beginning of my spiritual journey, I did not quite get the depth of this teaching. And in many ways, I still continue to explore its depth in my life. So my challenge was always holding this, sense of power behind these words in a way that I could actually experience it in my life. Because sometimes I could see that when I was actually desiring something, I was creating a little bit of an emotional turbulence sometimes, and sometimes a lot of emotional turbulence. And this was not the state in which I wanted to be for long periods of time. So I found myself resisting my own emotions, and this was one way in which I was seemed to be adding to my suffering instead of easing my suffering. And so I really kind of sat with this and allowed the words of the sacred scriptures to open my heart. And one day, the light bulb went off for me. I had immense clarity that actually true desire is not the issue. In true desire, there's actually an unloving and a softness and an alignment. However, in our humanness, what happens is we get trapped in emotional cycles of desiring something and getting so addicted to having it that nothing else actually satisfies us until we actually reach our desire. So in this way, we actually become consumers, people searching consumption rather than people actually reaching our desires, our true desires. And so this desire for consumption will inevitably cause us pain as well as suffering. So it was this lack of clarity on the role of pain and suffering that was actually causing my issues, because I was consumed by my desires. So when we look closely at the words used in the sacred scripture, what we begin to see is that there is a strong suggestion that we are already fully aligned and merged with our desires, and that our intention has been set so that we could actually lead into the fulfillment of our desire. This means everything we need in order to fulfill our desires is also already within us, which means nothing is actually missing in our lives. Therefore, desire is actually not the root of our suffering, and neither are the mechanisms that we've been given in order to materialize the desire into the physical world. The mechanisms are our actions, our physical body, and our thinking in order to get to our desire. So what we have to do then is to realize that there's something else going on. So if we have everything we need in our physicality to realize our desire, what is this thing that is missing? And what I came to realize it is the lack of acceptance of who we are that actually distances us from our desire. This is what is at the root of our suffering and giving us the illusion that we are actually away or farther away from materializing our desire. So why does our lack of acceptance of ourselves throw us off the path? Well, it's because when we accept ourselves for all our perceived flaws and our gifts, we actually become whole within. We become complete human beings. And that is the space where we come into our own divinity. And in our own divinity, we are actually never flawed. We are complete. So when we realize this, and when we realize ourselves as being complete, we are closest to the love of God. And yet, it is our feelings of less than and moral appropriateness that causes us to think that we are flawed. So how do we change our view of ourselves and come into complete acceptance of ourselves? The one thing we must do is we must actually stop berating and abusing ourselves because of our so-called negative traits. In other words, we must integrate our negative traits into our being. And we look at how we are actually being served by these very same traits that we have labeled as negative within us, so that we can stop resenting ourselves. It's the self-resentment that actually causes us to go into cycles of abuse and pain in our lives. So we see why we've been given these so-called traits and stop labeling them as negative and instead open our hearts to ourselves. And when we get to a place of total acceptance within ourselves, and as we do this bit by bit, we start to realize that the hold that suffering has on us starts to ease up. And when we stop suffering so much within ourselves, we start to actually allow the flame in our heart to burn brighter and brighter, and we realize that love is actually the only reality, and all else is in fact an illusion. And in this sense, we are actually love. So love is not flawed. And it is this realization that actually sets us free to see through the illusion of our suffering and help us manifest our deepest desires. So the illusion of our suffering and the actual suffering itself is what actually becomes the gateway to the realization of our desires. So if suffering pulls us down, we have to change our relationship to suffering so that it does not continue to pull us down. And so when we realize that suffering is the gateway, we open our eyes to our wholeness, to our own completeness. And in this way, we step into the incredible beauty of being human, and we stop doubting ourselves. Seen from this viewpoint, it seems suffering only has the role of showing us how we can come back in alignment and brings us back into the realization that we are on the way to satisfying our desire. So I truly believe that this is what the Buddha meant when he said that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. As emotional stewards of our internal world, our only job is, in fact, to change our belief and our relationship to pain. In other words, if we can realize that emotional pain is just a messenger on the way and not in the way, we can actually see what it has been trying to show us. We can stop the resistance to pain and instead allow it to show us when we are held back. And every single time we choose to suffer with our pain, we may realize that the stories that we have created around our experience are actually causing our suffering and not the experience itself. The moment of experience, the moment of pain in the experience is just a momentary experience. But the suffering is what we add on to that, what we tack on to that, on top of the pain. This is the hardest fucking part of being humans on the planet, because emotional pain feels so real. It feels so real when we're in the trenches of our pain. It feels so real. But if we can write a new storyline around our pain and suffering, we can surely release it. The mind-body connection has fascinated me for over 2 decades, and I still continue to learn about this connection every single day in my life. And the one thing I do know for sure is that when we can make meaning out of our suffering and bring certainty to our experiences that caused our suffering and our pain, we can begin to heal it and align ourselves to our truest desires. Have a good day.